They were Christian missionaries on a road in Haiti. The visit was over. The van was heading back through the hills. Then armed men stepped into the road. By night, 17 people were missing. For weeks, their families waited for proof they were still alive. No rescue team came through the door. So in the dark, some of them made a decision. They would try to walk out themselves. Haiti was tense by October 2021. Around Port-au-Prince, people already knew that the wrong road could change the whole day, because armed groups were not only hiding in poor neighborhoods anymore. They were stopping vehicles, taking control of traffic, and choosing victims in the open. That group still went. They were Christian missionaries and aid workers connected to Christian Aid Ministries, a group that had spent years doing relief work in Haiti. Most came from the United States, and one was from Canada. That detail matters. It explains why they were there, why they had gone out that day, and why a normal visit near the capital ended with them on a dangerous road. They were not chasing trouble or trying to make headlines. They had visited an orphanage. After the visit, they got back into the vehicle and started the drive back, the kind of simple trip that should have ended with a meal, a message home, and another ordinary night. Then armed men blocked them. The men were connected to 400 Mawozo, a gang that had already become feared for kidnappings around the capital. Once the vehicle was stopped, there was no space for a clean decision. Everything moved fast. One moment they were a group returning from aid work, and the next they were hostages. 17 people were taken from that road. Their families found out slowly. A phone call, a message, a missing update, then the kind of silence that makes people check the same screen again and again. Nobody at home had control anymore. The demand came later. Reports said the gang wanted $1 million for each hostage, a number so high it turned fear into pressure. This was not only about money. It was about power. Foreign hostages meant attention. The gang understood that, and they used it. A road outside Port-au-Prince had suddenly reached homes far away in America and Canada. But inside captivity, there was almost nothing clear. Families could hear pieces of information, but they could not see where their loved ones were sleeping, how they were being guarded, or what was being said when the captors were angry. That was the worst part. The story was no longer about a mission trip, or a visit, or a group trying to help. It had become a hostage case with no simple way out. And somewhere near Port-au-Prince, 17 people were being held because a gang believed their lives now had a price. The first days after the kidnapping did not give the families anything solid. There was fear, then a rumor, then another call, then waiting again. Nobody at home could trust a piece of news the first time they heard it, because every update had to be checked, repeated, and carried through people who were already scared. The group was believed to be somewhere outside Port-au-Prince. That sounded like information, but it was not enough to help anyone. A name on the map does not tell a family what room their son is in. It does not tell a mother whether her daughter slept. It does not tell anyone how the captors were acting when nobody else could hear them. The gang wanted money, but they also wanted pressure. That was the real weapon. Not only the guns on the road, not only the place where the hostages were kept, but the waiting itself. The captors could make people far away feel helpless without even standing in front of them. For the missionaries, everything had changed too fast to make sense. One part of the day still belonged to the life they knew. A visit, a vehicle, a road back from the orphanage. Then that life was cut off. After that, their names were no longer just names inside their families or churches. They were part of a ransom case. Christian Aid Ministries confirmed the kidnapping, and the story moved quickly. People in the United States and Canada began following every report. Officials were careful with their words. Families stayed close to their phones because a missed call suddenly felt dangerous. The gang understood what they had. Foreign hostages brought attention. The number of people taken made the case even bigger. 17 was not something that could disappear quietly, even in a country where kidnappings had already become terrifyingly common. Still, public attention did not mean safety. That is the part that is easy to miss from the outside. A case can be on the news, people can talk about it every day, and the hostages can still be sitting somewhere with no control over the next hour. The families had to live with that. They were close enough to the story to feel every second of it, but too far away to do anything with their own hands. They could not go to the road. They could not look through the door. They could not force the captors to answer honestly. So they waited. A day passed, then another one, and the normal rhythm of life started to feel fake. Meals, sleep, work, conversations, all of it had to continue while one question sat underneath everything. Are they still alive? That question followed the families through the first days. And somewhere outside Port-au-Prince, the hostages were learning that survival was no longer about a plan. It was about getting through the next hour without knowing what the next sound would mean. Days inside captivity did not feel like days anymore. The hostages could count time, but counting did not give them control. Morning only meant they had made it through the night. Night only meant another stretch of listening, waiting, and trying not to react too fast to every voice outside the room. Nobody there knew how long it would last. The captors had made their demand, and outside Haiti that number sounded impossible. $1 million for each hostage. For families back home, it was not just a ransom demand. It was a sentence hanging over every phone call. Inside, the missionaries had to stay alive under people who saw them as money. That changes a person quickly. You stop thinking about the whole future and start watching the next minute. A sound near the door. A change in tone. A guard who seems calm in the morning and angry later in the day. Small things become warnings. The group had children with them, and that made every hour heavier for the adults. They could not afford to fall apart. Fear was already in the room. Someone had to keep voices steady, keep people close, and keep the younger ones from understanding every part of what was happening. Faith was there too, because that was part of who these people were. They prayed. They spoke quietly. They tried to hold themselves together with the same belief that had brought them to Haiti in the first place. But belief did not make the door open. It did not remove the guns. It did not make the captors suddenly let them go. It only gave them something to hold when there was nothing else. Outside, Christian Aid Ministries was careful with what it said. The families were careful too. When hostages are still alive, every public word can feel risky. Say too much, and someone might get angry. Say nothing, and the silence becomes unbearable. Then, after weeks, something changed. 2 hostages were released. For the families, it was the first real proof that freedom was possible. But it also brought a harder truth. If 2 could come out, why not all of them? What did the release mean? Was it negotiation, pressure, illness, strategy, mercy, or something else? Nobody on the outside could fully know. The remaining hostages were still there. The same fear stayed in place, only now it had a new shape. Freedom had touched the group, but it had not reached everyone. More days passed. Then 3 more were released. 5 people were out, but 12 were still being held. That kind of news does not bring clean relief. It splits the heart in 2 directions. You are grateful for the ones who made it out, and terrified for the ones who did not. By then, the people still inside understood something. Waiting might not be enough. A rescue might never come the way people imagine it. Negotiations could drag on. The captors could change their minds. The road back to life was still somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the guards, beyond the dark. And slowly, the idea that sounded impossible at first began to take shape. If the door ever opened at the right moment, they might have to run. By December, 5 hostages were already out. For the families, that news did not bring a clean ending. It proved freedom was possible, but it also left 12 people behind. The case was still alive, and nobody knew what the gang planned to do next. The remaining hostages had been held for weeks. They had already learned the rhythm of captivity. When the place became louder, when guards moved, when a voice changed, everyone paid attention. Not because they had a plan ready, but because in a place like that, small changes could mean danger. Or a chance. Waiting had started to feel less like patience and more like risk. Negotiations could keep dragging on. The captors could change their minds. A promise from outside could sound hopeful and still not open the door. So when the opening came, they took it. It happened at night. There was no heroic music, no clean rescue scene, and no perfect moment where everyone suddenly knew what to do. They were tired people in a dangerous place, trying to leave quietly before fear or noise pulled them back. Once they got out, the danger did not end. Freedom, at first, was only distance. They had to move far enough that the gang could not catch them easily. Every sound behind them mattered. Every pause cost time. The darkness helped, but it also made the road harder to trust. They walked for hours. Some were weaker than others. Some had to be helped. The group moved through rough ground, trying to stay together while the night covered them. Nobody had the comfort of knowing exactly how far safety was. That is the part that makes this escape different. They were not handed over at a gate. They were not found by a rescue team waiting nearby. They left because the chance was there, and because staying another day could mean giving the captors more time to decide their future. By morning, they had made it far enough to reach help. A call was made. After 2 months of fear, the message finally reached the families. They were free. All 17 had survived. But survival did not erase what happened. A normal visit to an orphanage had turned into 62 days of captivity. A road outside Port-au-Prince had become the place where ordinary people were turned into ransom. And in the end, the last 12 did not wait for the gang to finish the story. They walked out. The call reached the families before the full story did. The hostages were alive. For 2 months, those families had lived between hope and bad news. A small update would come, then the silence would return. Someone might hear a detail, but nobody could relax until it was checked, repeated, and confirmed by someone closer to the case. By the time freedom came, relief was not simple. The people who came home had survived something that would follow them long after the headlines moved on. They had been taken from a road, held by armed men, and treated like a price. Their families had spent 62 days imagining rooms they could not see and voices they could not hear. Christian Aid Ministries later spoke about the escape through faith, and that made sense. These people were missionaries before the kidnapping. Prayer was part of their daily life before Haiti became a hostage case. It was part of how they understood fear, waiting, survival, and the fact that everyone taken from that road came back alive. But faith was not a shortcut through danger. The gang still had weapons. The ransom demands still hung over the case. Families still waited beside phones. The people inside captivity still had to read every sound, every movement, every change in the guards around them. The final escape came from a narrow opening. The remaining hostages saw a chance and moved before it disappeared. Outside, the night was dangerous in its own way. They did not know the safest direction. They only knew the place behind them had already taken too much. So they walked. Through darkness, through rough ground, through the kind of fear that makes every sound feel close. Nobody could promise them the next road would lead to help. Still, step by step, they put distance between themselves and the people who had held them. By morning, the case had changed. The last hostages reached help, and the message finally traveled back to the families who had been waiting since October. All 17 had survived. Years later, the case followed members of 400 Mawozo into court. Prosecutors described kidnapping as part of the gang's business, a way to turn fear into money and foreign hostages into pressure. That part mattered, because this was bigger than one road and one vehicle. It showed how far armed groups in Haiti had pushed into ordinary life. A prison sentence can close a case on paper. For the people who lived through it, the damage was more personal than that. 62 days had been taken from their lives. Families had carried fear through every meal, every phone call, every quiet moment when the mind goes back to the worst possibility. The story began with a visit to an orphanage. A group got into a vehicle and started back toward a normal evening. Then armed men stopped them, and 17 people disappeared into a hostage case that reached across countries. The ending could have been much worse. Instead, the last 12 found one opening in the dark and used it. They came back alive. And after everything the gang controlled, that was the one thing it failed to take from them.